right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Plotting for Success. On the other end is my good buddy Doug. Doug Castreva. How's it going, Doug?
How you doing, guys? Nice to be back on again today.
So we're kind of in the midst of in the middle of summer, kind of in a oddball time period, getting your mineral out, getting your food plot stuff situated for your fall food plots. How's the weather been up by you guys in Wisconsin? Like I said, I'm down in West Kentucky. How's the weather been by you guys?
We got over an inch last night of rain, so
Okay.
it's been seemed like but we did need it. People don't realize how much we do need it. The problem is where it's uber saturated, it still is uber saturated. So
Okay, sure.
where I live, it's what we call Sandville. It could use an inch of rain a week here and it ain't going to touch anything.
Sure.
But you get further east of me here, it's a little bit wet clay, lower ground, and it's pretty wet. But it's a good weed growing. So I was told I preach weed control, so that's a good thing. People can stay up on their weed, getting their weeds down.
Yep.
So that's a good thing. But it's a good growing year so far. I think by us, I know some places, like I said, talking to different customers, are either uber dry or uber wet. There's not a lot of happy medium, so to speak. It's the weather. Mother Nature always wins. That's what I tell everybody.
And that's the thing. We'll get into food plots. We're going to call this part one of Food Plots for Dummies. We're going to call this segment. So we're going to get into that, and we can take all these steps that me and Doug, we're going to break down these steps today. What's most important, step by step by step, and maybe we get through everything. Maybe we don't. I mean, probably not. There's a lot of stuff going on. But the one thing that's always a constant, you can't mess with Mother Nature. If she wants to ruin your food plots, or she wants to ruin your crops, ain't nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, it's good.
I mean, maybe best case scenario, if you got a drought, maybe you got a big pond, you can water your plots. Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, I have guys that do that.
Yeah,
I have customers that did that years ago. They had a pump and they were watering. I'm like, man, you guys are dedicated.
Yep.
I've had it all. I've seen it all. I've got guys that drain tile their food plots because they're too wet.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, you're dedicated. God bless you. And it works.
Yeah.
And it works for the most part. Most of them it works. So
yeah.
Who am I to sit there and complain? I think it's not a bad
there's a million different ways to skin a cat. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
You got any trail cameras out on mineral or anything yet?
No, I got mineral. I got a lot of customers. We've been going through a lot of mineral, and I got a lot of customers that do have cameras out, and
sure, I'm
getting some unbelievable deer. I think this fall is going to be a great year as a whole, and the reasoning is I think we had a pretty mild winter. And and people do not realize realistically how important, they're, getting deer through the winter is very, very, very important. So if they had a light winter where they a little bit more mild, man, it seems like the deer are doing great. I've been hearing a lot of predator issues, mostly bears eating fawns and coyotes eating fawns.
That's one thing about especially like central to northern Wisconsin in the past couple of years. And once again, we can get into this in depth if we really wanted to. The bear numbers are ridiculous. When I was still living in Wisconsin, I was scouting some public land up by you guys, running trail cameras. It was unbelievable what I was getting on camera up there. I mean, it takes forever to draw a tag in certain areas and stuff like that. But I can only imagine. I mean, it could take its toll on the deer numbers and everything else, really.
And I don't know if the DNR does that strategically or not, but so we're right on, we're just north of 64.
Yep.
Okay. Takes, 12 to 14 years to get a tag here. You go across 64, which is a mile away. Okay. Every other year.
Yep.
And I don't understand.
How can one road have such a difference in variance of how long it takes for you to draw a tag? That makes no sense.
It makes no. I don't get it.
Maybe if it was 2 to 4 years on the north side, but 10 to 1 to 2.
Yeah. I just don't understand it. So if you got a guy that's elderly, let's just say hypothetically, he's 60 years old and his dream is to kill a bear.
Better go somewhere else.
Until he's 70 some years old.
Yeah.
I don't. And I mean, I've been getting this a lot with a lot of my customers that are on our clover blends because deer love clover. They pound the crap out of clover.
Yeah.
So the bear are on the clover steady, and they're like, man, Olivia, we notice our fawns are disappearing. And I'm like, they eat a lot. Bears, they go catch a fawn. I mean, they got a nose, but what did they say? They can smell like 8, 10, 12 miles away. It's something
ridiculous.
stupid,
Yeah.
you know, but so, I mean, that's a natural predator, and the predators are bad in areas. Some areas, you know, it's coyotes or it's fox or whatever. It always seems to have an issue somewhere, somehow, some way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but nature always seems to take care of itself. You know, we're supposed to be stewards of nature, which, you know, our hunters are, and that's kind of what we're trying to get into here, Matt. We're trying to educate and help people on how to take care of their deer on their property. And, you know, we talked briefly about how many different, you know, deer management companies that we work with. I work with. I help tons of different ones.
Yep.
And we all coexist. We all work together. We all get together. We all help. I help any customer. I don't care who it is. I don't care what it is. I'm out to help and educate. Everybody's got their own, you know, business. They got their own thing going on, just like you do. I know we do a lot of stuff with Total Land Management and Tom Mesnard, and I know we talked about him several times. I just sit there and he does his things his way, and he's got a great following, great clientele. I give his customers probably the best customer service you're ever going to get, and it works out great for them and his customers and himself as a whole, because it makes him look good, and we all work together. So, you know, getting back to the main issue, what we're trying to get accomplished here on this whole thing is educate the public on how to do things correct, because there's a lot of people, back to, you know, the food plotting end of it, whether Mother Nature plays such a big part. But, you know, we're going to, and I know we touched base a little bit about soil testing, and we're going to have Chris on from Ag Source here on one of our, I think on our next episode we're going to do, and we're going to talk about soil testing and stuff like that. And I know we talked about that as well. So all these little things all are going to help, you know, but, you know, I know we jump all over the board on this last comment, but this is all things that I'm excited about, because I think this is what the public calls me and asks me questions. And I don't, you know, we call it food plotting for dummies, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
But you're not a dummy if you ask a question, and there is no dumb question.
Yeah.
If you don't know, how are you supposed to learn if
100%.
you don't ask?
100%.
And you know, and you touched base on something off air here. We were just chatting about everybody does things differently, and we'll get into that here a little bit in the podcast. And I tell people, if you got a way that you're doing and it works for you, continue doing it. I don't care. I you know, I'm not out here to sit there and say, you know, you rah, you got to do it Doug's way. Listen, that ain't how it works, people.
Not at all. And even the management side of things, you brought up a couple different companies that are out there doing it. There might be something that they say, and I scratch my head and I say, I don't do it that way. I guess it doesn't make sense to me. But guess what? If it works for them, who am I to judge? And that's why at the end of the day, you know, we all got to be on the same page. There's not enough room in this industry or just in, you know, in the hunting world for us to be going at it with each other. There's so many other things that hunters have to deal with politically. And all these other things that we will touch on with a special guest, hopefully down the line. But I mean, we just got to be all on the same page, because you know what? There might be a timber stand improvement method that I love using, and the other guy's like, that's crazy, I don't use that, you know, and that's fine. And like I said,
and you're right. It's like there's not no real right way, and there's not no real wrong way.
There's really not. I can have my opinion all day, but guess what? That guy probably can grow big bucks too. He's just got his own way of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just some people that don't know what they're doing. They just need help, and that's why we're hoping that they watch this and they can sit there and say, "Oh, that makes sense," or "Oh, that makes sense."
Yeah.
And that's what this is all about. It's about growing deer. That's basically what we did, and it's all going to start with your food plotting and your deer on your management. How are you going to sit there and what are you going to give them? When are you going to give it to them? What are they intaking? What are they not intaking? These are all things that we'll touch base on as we go down the line.
So should we get into the whole step-by-step food plotting for dummies then? So we touched on doing your soil test last week. Obviously, that's probably the number one step that I would take. And I guess I almost maybe want to take a step back is, what do you want to plant? So if you were to recommend, Doug, you know, obviously we're at this point of the year. Let's pretend somebody calls you up right now and they say, you know, obviously I didn't put anything in the spring. When do, you know, well, what am I going to plant? Because that comes into play when you're getting that soil test too. You need to know how to fertilize correctly, lime correctly, all these other things. So planning and knowing what you're actually going to plant is very important. So if somebody calls you up, you know, today and they're maybe new or planted a couple food plots or whatever, what should somebody be planning, you know, this time of year or in the coming month or you know, in the coming months?
Okay.
Or so?
And here's how my life is as to a T. Okay. So I get in the springtime, and I'm not going to, and I got most of my customers swayed in a direction that I call like them swayed in. But I get oodles and oodles of calls in the spring. They see the first farmer out in the field moldboarding or plowing or disking or working the fields, whatever. Oh my God, I got to put food plots in.
Yep.
So they call me up and I got to plant this and I got to plant. Oh my God, I got farmers out. I got to start planting.
Yep.
And I'll be like, hang on, time out. Okay. You don't get your underwear in a bundle. The only thing you're going to be planting right now is several little things. And one is beans, you know, whether they're forage beans or soybeans or whatever. Corn. Okay. Corn is another good one to plant in the spring. Okay. If you want cover, you know, like our safe zone or tell you when you get older, you forget all your stuff. Three-way switch, the switch grasses.
Yep.
Okay, so those are things that you know are good to plant in the spring. Okay, and I don't plant any brassicas in the spring. I personally don't. I know tons of people that do.
Sure.
Does it work for them? Knock yourself out. Where I live in northern central Wisconsin, brassicas, unless you have an overabundance of deer, and we can get on that whole subject in another way, deer are not big brassica fans during the spring and summer. But you got to remember also, we are planting a garden vegetable, basically. You can take your kale and your collards and your radishes and your turnips and your sugar beets. As humans, we're mammals, so we can consume them just like a deer does, okay? Yeah. But you want them, I tell my customers, you want them to peak when you're in a deer stand.
100%.
Okay? And we'll get into the whole brassica world of when they consume them and when they don't consume them. But what my goal to the customer is this: what is your pH at? That's one of the first questions I ask anybody. What is your pH?
Because you got to be realistic. If you don't have the pH, you can't be putting certain seeds in the ground because it's not going to grow. You're setting yourself up for failure. So Doug might have a plot, you know, mix where it looks great on paper, and he might already have the seed bed, you know, or the pH and all the other things already figured out. So you got to look at it that way. You got to look at what your soil test is telling you, what your pH is, and then decide basically what you can plant, because you might not be able to, I mean, you can't just go in there and throw anything. And depending on what kind of soil health you're really dealing with. So that's a good point you bring up.
Well, I mean, that is the main key with almost all of our customers is once you learn where your pH is at, we can work from there. Yeah. And I'm big into, you know, obviously, you know, I farm a little bit. So for me personally, my biggest thing to me is it's really simple. I want to get something green in the soil.
Yeah.
I like to get, and I call it a manure crop. So I will go in the spring, and I'm pretty blessed. I got Chris from Ag Source who's going to be doing our next show with us. And we can talk a little bit way more into depth on the soil testing and amendments and things like that. But you know, once we find out what your pH is at, you know, and lime is a whole nother topic. And we're going to touch base on all of these things in our shows to come. But you know, we need to get your soil where it needs to be to grow first and foremost. Because, you know, it ain't, you know, you always hear that old saying, I get this question all the time. You got any throwing grow?
I had a buddy asked me about this last weekend. Yes.
All seeds that you throw down on the ground can grow.
Yes.
They can. But will they amount to anything is a whole nother world. So this gets back down to how do you do it? When do you do it? When do you utilize it? How do you get your most utilization out of it? Fertilization, you know, these are all subjects that are, you know, for me, that I come on. So the first thing I tell my customer when they call me in the spring and they want to plant something, I give them exactly what I just told you. Are you putting beans, corn, or are you putting switchgrass or something for a barrier? No, then you're not worried about planting right now.
Right.
And I'm like,
and that's the thing. I'm gonna chime in quickly, especially with the soybeans. One thing that I do, I mean, sometimes I've put food plots in places that just don't. I mean, they're wet and they're gonna stay wet most summer, and you can't get them in early. There's nothing wrong with planting your soybeans a little bit later, and honestly, even with your fall food plot blend, just for a straight up, you know, attractiveness reason. I mean, maybe it's not gonna produce a pod, but if you plant it a little bit later in the summer, it's going to be at a different place as far as maturity goes. And a lot of times when they're younger, they're a little bit more palatable and they're a lot more attractive for deer. So if you're looking to kill something early season on your plot, maybe mix in some soybeans too. You know, that's one thing you can kind of spread throughout the entire summer. You know, I mean, soybeans is like I said, soybeans you can plant with your fall blend. You can
Well,
get it in the spring. You can kind of get it in whenever in the summer.
I'm glad you touched on that, because I got in the Midwest here, especially Illinois, Iowa, parts of Indiana and Ohio. The deer there are what I call our bean babies. In other words, they love beans. And I get this all the time from my customers that'll be like, "Oh man, the beans are starting to dry down, and they're not in them." Well, of course not.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is, plant yourself an acre of 2 in June, in July.
Yes.
Like
Or something
said,
that's going to
even in
mature at a
August.
different rate. Yes.
Right. And they will. So what if they don't have a pot on them?
Exactly.
If they freeze and they're green, and you know what? Listen. First of all, beans also are nitrogen fixed, so they're helping your soil too.
Yes.
So it's a weed control, because they're 99% of them are Roundup ready. So you can spray them and kill them. So I use beans a lot in the spring for weed control. I till in a lot of beans. I just do, because it's a good manure crop. It helps build the soil, and it gives them protein back to growing antlers, because protein grows antlers. Nutrition grows antlers, and you can never overemphasize that. That's why I tell people, I just want something that's annual. Okay, do you really? Well, yes. And I say, why is that? Well, I don't need nothing in the spring. And I said, okay, then what are your deer eating in spring? Well, they're eating beans and corn. No, back up. No, they're not. They're not eating corn for sure in the spring, unless you're putting it out in bags, because they're not eating it.
Yes.
And beans are not getting planted till some states, I'm sure, are in April, and I get that. But here in northern Wisconsin, you're not looking till May, end of May. Okay?
What is the protein breakdown of your soybeans? Do you know?
Well, on an average, the last time we sent some in, they were right around in that 20-some percentile phase.
Probably 25,
Okay,
25, 26,
20, I think we're more than that. I think I had 26.2 on one sample, and I had some that were like 27.8. And that's crude protein on the grain. So, and here's another thing, and this is another analogy that I brought up, that you're talking about nutritional value.
Yes.
I tell people this right out. You want to feed your animals what is going to be going to do the best for them. I said it's no different than a bodybuilder trying to put on muscle mass by eating a pound of popcorn. You can eat a pound of steak or a pound of popcorn. They're both going to fill you up, but one is going to stay with you longer. And you know what? And the moral of the story is, you need something that's got more of a nutritional value. So your food plots got to be set up back to, I like to plant like our tagged out or our big racks in the fall.
What's in those blends? Let's get down to the nitty gritty. What plants are actually in those blends then?
Well, like the tagged out and the big racks both have alfalfa and clovers.
Yep, okay? I know you got a lot of stuff in them. Yeah.
That's their main diet. Like Big Rex has got chicory as well. But where I'm going with this is that I like to plant late in the fall, or when I say late season, late summer, you get into July. I like to plant it then. It gets a better catch because it's going to have a cover crop, because the brassicas grow really quickly, makes a little canopy, allows that alfalfa and clover to get going, and they will, the deer love it, okay, first and foremost. Second of all, in the springtime, back to what we were just talking about, when the deer have nothing to eat, the clover will slowly but surely start growing. And the alfalfa will start growing. The chicory will start growing. And you're giving them, and this is in March, April, depending on how warm it is in the rains. But now you're giving them a good source of protein in the springtime while they're finishing off their fawns and before they birth them, and the bucks for their antlers. This is all things that a deer nutritionally needs to take in. And like in the springtime, you can see deer are out on winter wheat fields or winter rye fields. Why? Because it's green and nutritious.
Yeah.
Right? That's why they're there. It's a food source.
Yep.
So you got to think about, deer, raising deer or having deer or whatever you want to call it. You need to think outside the box. It is a 12-month out of the year thing. 365 days.
100%. It's as simple as this. If you have a food plot, and I know you got some blends that do it, if you have a food plot that's going to cover everything from, the time it starts sprouting all the way until that following spring. The quicker that those deer, basically the healthier the deer, those deer can stay throughout the winter, the faster they're going to bounce back in the spring, and the faster they're going to start, their bodies are going to start focusing on antler production. So if you're planting a food plot that's only going to be good, during one portion of the year, you're doing yourself a disservice for the following year, especially if you run into a harsh winter and especially in your part of the country, things like that. Maybe there's not a lot of woody browse, maybe you're dealing with mature timber and deer got to travel far and you're dealing with a bunch of snow or whatever the case is. Don't set your deer herd up for failure by planting a variety of different plants that basically mature at different rates and are palatable at different times of the year. It comes down to the health of your herd the following year. So
I'm glad you touched on the snow, because I got a friend of mine up in UP at Jay Fish. He lives way up in the UP,
mm-hmm.
and he was down here a few weeks ago, and we were chatting. And this was actually it kind of hit me, because he said he's seen his first deer that had a little bit of velvet, and I'm like, huh? He said, oh yeah. He said, the winters are so harsh up there. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I'm learning. Okay.
Yeah.
I said, I know you get a lot of snow. He said, oh yeah, we get, anywhere from 100 to 300 inches a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, them poor deer. But that's all they know. They don't know any different.
I've hunted up in Marquette, Michigan, and during like a snowstorm where they got almost 2-3 feet. And just to think that a deer can even survive in something like that, let alone just thrive in something like that, it's ridiculous.
It's hard. I know. I'm with you. I was like, oh my God. So I got customers in Illinois who got the G2s growing, okay?
Yeah.
And here you got Jay up there who's got a little bit of velvet coming out of the buds. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, and that's the difference between what weather does to a deer. And and I think a lot of it is nutritional value. Yeah. And I'm sure genes play a big part, but you can take what I call closed genes and you can make them excel if you can give them the right proteins and the right feed sources too.
Absolutely.
So it kind of coincide. But back to our original question was, okay, first thing we're going to do is soil sampling. What are we looking at? How are we looking at doing it? Soil sampling and finding out what your pH, is that is what, our first thing to a customer, that's the first thing that I tell them.
Okay.
We got to find out what your pH is at.
And now let's get to the split in the road. Okay. Now let's say I'm the guy that has poor pH. I got an acidic soil. I got my pH down in the 5s, maybe even worse. There's guys out there, like I told you, I dealt with a client this year. He was down in the 4s. I mean, it's bad. All right.
4s?
Yeah, 4.8. 4.8, and it was bad. So, all right, let's go. Like I said, split in the road. Let's go that way for a second. You're that guy. You got a low pH. What steps do we take next?
Well, the first thing that I try to do is obviously get lime. Now, liquid lime, and we're going to have plot doctor guys on here, Steve and Kenton or Max, come on and do a little, visit with us and explain a little bit more about our product. I got hooked up with them, and their pH, their liquid lime is the bomb because it's instantaneous.
Yep.
But let's just say hypothetically, you have a plot that, like you just said, is bad, and it needs 6 tons to the 1. The worst I've ever seen was out of Missouri, and it needed like 21 ton of lime to the acre. And I'm like,
ridiculous.
Find another spot.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, something ain't right. To find out that it was from a mining, distribution or whatever it was. But let's just say, I'm just going to say hypothetically, it needs, like you said, 6 ton of lime to the acre. I try to get out ag lime if it's that bad. I just do. Now,
because with the liquid lime, the only, I guess, downside, and it's not a down, I mean, it depends how you look at it. It's something you have to do every single year, but you're going to get instantaneous results. So with pelletized or granular lime, it's going to take how many months for that to break down?
It usually takes on an average of 8 to 12 months. But now in the same token, with that being said, you need something for your first year.
Yes.
Otherwise, your plants are not going to be able to absorb any of the fertilizers.
100%. 100%.
So, I mean, I use the liquid and the granular. Now, if there's a place, and I get this from a lot of customers, well, there's no way I can get in there with a piece of equipment to spread it. And I'm not doing it by hand. And you know what? I respect that.
It can be a pain in the butt, especially if you got bad soil.
I get it. I get it. So if the liquid and a sprayer works for you, continue with liquid and a spraying.
Yeah.
I'm all for that.
Just know it's something you're gonna have to repeatedly do year after year.
Right. And I try to, and it is what it is. But now you also could weigh out your price in your time, because, and I don't know what ag line is going for. It's all over the board. I heard from $100 and some dollars a ton to $200 and some dollars a ton. Spread. Some of it is, you can buy it bulk and then spread it yourself. Whatever. I don't care and I don't care how you do it. And I ain't going to get into that. If you want to get ag lime on, you need to get it on. If you're going to put pelletized lime on, get it out. And get it worked into your soil. Get it starting to break down. And that takes like 8-12 months, okay? But in the interim, another thing too, what I like to do is I like to plant something that's going to get green and that I can put back in the soil. I'm big at putting green products back in the soil. It helps with moisture areas. It helps with nutritional areas. It helps your soil out. It gives them something that's going to rot down, break down.
It's a good it's a good tactic to rebuild your soil at the end of the day if you got poor soil. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, so these are all little tidbits that I share with my customers, because I get a lot of guys that are like, and back to each his own. I'm not here to sit there and say yes or no.
Yep.
But what I do, this is how I do it. I spray one day, I till it in the next day.
Yeah.
That's just me.
Yep.
I try to put something, even though because that plant is dead in a matter of hours.
Yep.
Okay. It's dead.
And so many people are told to wait a week, 2 weeks.
Yeah. 2 weeks. Oh, I know. And then it's browned and it's brown, it's drier than a popcorn part. Now you're trying to put that back in the soil, and you know what? It takes twice as much nitrogen to break down that dead matter. And then, are you going to get something back out of it in return? Yeah, eventually.
Something. Yeah, something.
But I would rather put, that good bacteria back into the soil. And that's just personal preference. I got different guys that do different things. Now, I got different customers that, they can't till. They don't have a tiller, or they don't have a drag, or they don't have a cultipacker, or they don't even have a piece of equipment. So back to the throw and grow thing. If you've got a backpack sprayer and some of our seeds that we have, and you get good weather, you're going to grow stuff. Now, is it going to be like what you see on TV? Probably not.
Probably not.
But
possible though.
It's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible. I've had customers send me pictures that floored me.
Yeah.
Floored me, and actually very humbling pictures.
Yeah.
Because I was like, and I get a lot of side-by-side people. I get a lot of customers say, "Oh, I've been planting this for years, and Doug, I tried your stuff, blah blah blah," and oh my God, and it's a humbling experience.
A big thing that has to do with that too is the seed to soil contact. If you got lucky and you put down your throw and grow right before a rainstorm and it created seed to soil contact with those smaller seeds, it's going to give you a lot better chance than if it sat out there for a week or two and turkeys and birds come pecking through it and steal half your seed.
Very, very, and it's very, very true. 100%.
Yep.
So, a person's got to think outside the box. Okay, how am I going to do this? How are we going to, what have I got for equipment? And I asked a customer, that's like almost the second question I asked them. Okay, what is your pH at? What have you got for equipment? What are you doing? And I got a sprayer. That's all I got.
Yep.
Well, and I got some guys that got everything.
Sure.
I mean, I'm actually envious, jealous they got everything. As I'm pretty low key, easy going. I don't have everything. But I don't need it either.
There's a million different ways to skin a cat. Back to that.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So to each his own, and certain deer in certain areas like certain things at certain times, and so you got to figure out your blends that are going to be good for you. And our blends are what we call very busy, and I'll say that probably over and over again.
Yeah.
But it's because you're building restaurants.
Yeah.
You want to give your deer ample opportunity to eat different varieties, and then you can find what they like. The deer, I tried to explain this to a customer the other day. We were talking about this. I said, well, I don't know what deer like to eat. I said, it's all about their palatability and what they have to offer them.
Yep.
I said, if you get up in the morning and you're craving something, and it's because you're lacking something. And deer don't have, they can't go open up the refrigerator and grab what we can grab, or go to the grocery store and buy what we want, or go to a restaurant and order what we want. So my goal is to give them enough variety in a food plot that will attract them and keep them there.
They don't have to go search for it. It's all in one spot.
Yes. And that's the key. It's all about that. So You know, as far as, you know, first steps, you know, are going to get back down to soil testing. You know, I work on weed control, and when I'll tell you, you know, this is how I do it. To each his own, and some people don't have the time to do this. Some people don't have the energy to do this. Some people don't have the means to do this. But if I got a spot that's really weedy and I'm really worried about it, I will put beans in, even if the deer will eat them up. I will put beans in because I can spray it continuously.
Yes.
And I'm also getting nutritional back into the soil.
Yep.
If I can't, if that don't work for me, I will, a lot of times I'll take and I'll spray it, kill it, till it, and leave it 30 days. It will green back up, people. If you get a rain and a heat, any weed seed that's dormant it's gonna grow. Now, yes. I just had this happen since our last podcast that we did last week. Customer sent me an email and said, "Hey, you know, I planted your tank, and he's way up north. I planted your tank, which to me is a little early. I told him that after we talked, and he said, I got all this grass growing in it." And I said, well, there's no grass seeds in the tank. I know that for a fact because you would physically see that first and foremost. So he said, and I've not had weeds in there for years. He said, for years, it's been pretty clean. And I'm like, kind of baffled me. I said, so what did you do different? Because you had to do something different. And he said, oh, well, my dad got a new moldboard plow for his tractor, and instead of tilling it, we moldboarded it. And I'm like, that's what's problem. And I preach this when I do my seminars all the time. Less is more. Till it only 2-3 inches, because any seed that's sitting at 4 or 5 inches are dormant. If they're not popping out, they're going to stay there. But the minute you aerate them and get them up and moving, they're going to start growing.
And another thing to that point too, I mean, me and Doug, we have two different planting methods that we like to use. Doug doesn't even really know, you know, what method I like to use, but what we can both agree on is the deeper that you're tilling into your soil, one, you're releasing a lot of dormant seeds that obviously are going to spread into your plots and stuff like that, but you're draining the nutritional value lower into the seed bed where a lot of your plants can't reach it. So all of a sudden, let's say you're the guy that's tilling 6, 8, 10, 12 inches deep. How far down do the roots to a soybean go, or to a clover? So can it reach the nutrients, or have you drained the soil, you know, to a lower level? So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you're the guy that's going to till it or work up your soil, don't be going down there 12 inches, you know, just barely scrape the top really is all you have to do.
Right. Yeah. I tell people don't overthink it, because, you know, you're farming, but you're growing a seed that is, I mean, most of our blends are 600,000 seeds per pound. I mean, they're tiny.
Yeah.
You know, so you think about weed seeds that have been sitting there for year after year, mature, seeds out, falls out, seeds out, falls out for year after year. And all of a sudden you're putting in a new plot, you're going to have a nightmare.
And go ahead.
You know, I mean, and it takes a little while to keep control of that, but you can get control of that. It might take a year or two. Or who knows? Thankfully,
those radishes and turnips, the big broadleaf plants, they'll help shade out some of the sunlight that get down to those, and they'll help with weed control. But like I said, you're number one. You're going to have to deal with some weeds. So just be prepared for it.
Yeah.
So,
and deer don't care. You know, and that was another thing.
Who's to say those deer aren't going to eat the weeds?
Well, and that, you know, and the majority of the time, they're going to go to what's going to be the best flavor and the best tasting. But what was funny is, you know, I get this all the time because, you know, some people are just, you know, I don't know how you want to put it. They're just perfectionists, and they want their food plot to look just like a lawn and a whole thing. And I tell customers, the deer don't care.
No,
the deer don't care. They don't care what it looks like.
No,
they don't really care. All they care about is what they can eat and go to bed and whatever else happens in their life. They're very simple mammals. They really are. So don't overthink it. It doesn't have to look picture perfect like it belongs in a magazine or on a TV show.
Right.
You know, it's just all you're trying to do is keep your deer on your property and keep them healthy and growing antlers and keep the does and the fawns and keep them healthy and growing. That's what our goals are as hunters. That's where, you know, everybody wants to shoot a booner. Okay. I get it. I understand it. But in the reality of life is you have to grow them.
Yeah.
And you got to start somewhere. So, you know, if you're getting into plotting and you don't know what you're doing, baby steps, just baby steps. And that's what we're trying to get across.
And that's what we're,
especially in our videos.
Yeah.
Right.
So now we got this fork in the road. Okay. You got poor pH, step number one, figure out what you're going to plant, obviously, and then build your soil accordingly. If this is your first year, planting a certain area, get that liquid lime in there, because obviously that, the pelletized or the granular lime, it's not going to break down in time to benefit you this year. So make sure you're getting a liquid lime down so you get some instant satisfaction for those food plots this year. All right, now let's go back down and go to the other fork in the road, to the guy who's got a 6 to 7 pH. What's the next steps for that guy? Everything looked good on his soil test. Maybe he's got a supplement with a little bit of this fertilizer or that fertilizer. What steps are next for that guy?
My main thing for me is pH and what are we going to get in the soil, and how fast is it going to get a reaction? And I think, right, you kind of touched on all those bases is, what can we get on it? How can we do it? And the average layman is trying to figure out, how are we going to get our fertilizer on? I got a lot of guys that don't even have fertilizer spreaders,
yeah.
And it's tough. So these are all things that, as a customer, you try to educate and try to help, and they'll grasp onto it, and they will work around whatever you tell them within the means that they have possible.
Yep.
And that's all we can do.
Definitely. So like I said, the main thing is knowing where your pH is at, knowing where your soil is at. Obviously, if you got that pH, prime example, I had a buddy, he didn't want to do his soil test, and he's newer to the food plotting game. We did it, and thankfully he had a good pH. I'd have to look at the soil test again and see exactly what it called for, but it wasn't going to take much. So if anything else, that thing saved him some money by not throwing down a bunch of just general fertilizer, some triple 15, triple 19, putting down just something, that a lot of guys refer back to, because in some way, shape, or another, I guess you're helping yourself to a certain extent, or hurting yourself by, maybe your pocketbook or whatever else. But knowing where your pH is at, and then taking, going whichever direction you have to go from there. So like I said, obviously the next step that comes to mind for me is something that people are overlooking, and you touched on it for a second there, and I've had guys touch on it too, is slow down. You might have your pH and you might have your plan, but just because you see those spring plots going in, stuff like that, don't go and plant those plots too early. There is a time in which these plants are strategically going to mature so that they're most palatable, and that they're at their most attractiveness, throughout certain portions of the season. And it's all going to happen at different times. So with Doug's blend, for instance, what's the one in the purple bag called again?
The Tagged Out.
Yeah, so Tagged Out has a lot of different stuff in it, stuff that's going to come back the following year, stuff that's going to pop up early, and stuff that's basically going to be attractive throughout the entire season. So that's something to keep in mind. And in order to reap the benefits of these fall food plots, guys, you need to plant them at the right time, because otherwise if you're planting them too early, let's face the facts. Your soybeans are coming in at 26, 27%, protein. A deer, at its peak, let's say a nursing doe can take in about 16, 17% of that. There's not much more she's going to go after during the summertime than your soybeans. So,
right.
Face the facts. You could plant your food plot and it might turn out beautiful, but if it's not the most attractive or the most necessary thing, you're not really doing yourself very good, or a lot of good. So save it, plan it right before season, depending where you are geographically. Plan it during, that late July, early August. Plan it around a rainstorm. If you can see rain in the forecast, get out there and plan it that way. So just
I have a couple of customers that'll sit there, and I know Tom, he recommends doing this, and I it's just not the way I do it, but it works for him. He has his customers plant, our Big Rocks plant, and they plant it early in spring, and it comes in really big and thick and healthy. Sure. And then he has them go back and broadcast in dead zone in the fall, so then you get the younger stuff and you got the bigger stuff, and it's working great for him, and it works great for the customers, and they're happy. And I'm like, hey, if it works for you, do that, because
exactly.
It's just I do it a little differently, but I just tell people, if that's what he recommends and it works good for him and it works good for you, who am I to argue with you?
It's funny you bring that up, because there's a strategy that I like using that's similar to that too, with soybeans, planting those soybeans and then broadcasting over the top of them with that fall blend. Just so you have, like I said, basically you're just taking a couple steps backward, and you're kind of, then you have the entire buffet, I guess you could put it that way. You got the summer crop in there, and in the same location, you could double your seeding rate maybe. because obviously you're not going to be putting seed into the ground. You're kind of banking on a rainstorm, making seed to soil contact or whatever else. But I mean, then once again, you got everything at all different maturity rates, and the deer really don't have to go anywhere else. Obviously, deer are gonna, depending on, you know, velvet drop and things like that, and the rut, they're gonna move and they're gonna go different places. It's gonna be hard to hold any single deer for the entire season, but it's gonna help your odds. I mean, if you got the food, the deer are gonna come. So it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel, to me, that's the best way to do it, is to give them all they can utilize all year round, the best way you can. And you know, I tell customers, think outside the box.
Yep.
Because the biggest problem that I have with most of their hunters, when hunting season's over, which is by Christmas, most places, some states do still hunt in January, but, you know, they go home, they're done. We're done for the year, and they forget about their deer. They forget about, wow, man, I wonder how they're doing.
Big mistake. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so I mean, these are things, you know, they need their mineral. They need to have a food source. I even take, and I go with my skid steer after I'm done feeding cows, and if we get a lot of snow, and I push off the food plots. You know, I feel sorry for them. So I go and take and push the snow off, and it can easier to dig up the tubers, and they can eat the bulbs. You know, in the winter, it's a little easier on them. You know, it's just, you know,
especially in your neck of the woods, I'll think of also maybe it's an ice storm or something like that. How much energy is it taking those deer to get down to the actual, you know, to the plants themselves? I mean, how much energy are they burning?
Oh, true.
And then it's just making it even harder on them. So doing little things like that, it seems maybe goofy to you, but it's not a bad idea.
No, and I do a lot of that. It's funny you bring up ice storms, because that's usually when I do it the most, because they can't get through that crust, and that's hard on their legs. And, you know, and I mean, I'm laughing because I think I took Tyler out a couple years ago. We had an ice storm, and I jumped on the skid steer. I went and fed cows, and I was done. I went all the way down, and I just started pushing snow with all that crusty ice on it. And I'm pushing and pushing and pushing, and all of a sudden there's green matter, and we left it overnight. We went back the next day, and it was just
somebody let the cows out.
Yeah, it was just tore up. So, and it was really kind of cool to see. And he's like, "Oh my God, Dad, look at how they hit that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, that was an easy meal for them, you know." And so we did that pretty much almost all the winter. I would take a little 50-foot by 50-foot area, and I would just push the snow off into the swamp, and you know, and I'd try to keep my bucket at 4 or 5 inches, but at least they could get in there and dig a little bit, and you know, and get at the whatever I had growing. So, you know, these are all little tidbits that, you know, and I mean, not everybody can do that. No, don't get me wrong. I get it. You can't go pull a tractor in 3 feet of snow out in the middle of nowhere. I get it. But, you know, little things that help your deer to grow. That's all.
Definitely. So let's go back to this fork in the road. Let's maybe take one more step for the people for food plotting for dummies, like I said. So this fork in the road kind of separated us, but by being on the side that needed the lime, the liquid lime, and had the low pH, we built that soil. Let's say we got that soil to where it needs to be able to plant something that's going to help you out this fall. So now we're crossing paths. We're getting back to the same spot. You got your plan, you got your soil test, you kind of know what fertilizers you're going to need. What's the next step?
Well, I mean, I do, you know, some people are diskers. I'm more of a minimal tillage guy. So I'm a tiller. I till lightly. I'll set the shoes at about 2 inches. So I'm only tilling about 2 inches down, maybe 3 max. I don't go and till it like 3 or 4 times either. I just get the soil roughed up pretty much. And then I go through, and if it's really soft and really soft and in sand, a lot of times it is. I will cultipack it first. I will go and cultipack it, and then I will seed it, and then I'll cultipack it again. I tell that to a lot of customers, and they're having a fit because, oh my God, I got a 4-foot cultipacker, and I got to do this twice. And I'm like, listen, you don't have to. I'm just saying, if you want a better catch, and you know, another thing too is, if you're going to fertilize your plot, you know, make sure you get your fertilizer down before you till it in, unless it's liquid. If it's liquid, you don't have to worry about it. But granular is crucial to get covered, because urea, nitrogen goes up. I always tell that old adage, if you can smell it, you're losing it. So, you know, I try to put my fertilizer down and then lightly till it in, and then, you know, pack it, seed it, pack it. That's how I usually end up doing it. And we'll get more into depth on, how we get into that part of it and at what time. But that's how I end up doing my plots.
So
Rule of thumb.
you ended up bringing up an interesting topic, and this really, I think, hits home, and it needs to hit home for the guys who have the poor soil with the poor pH, and they really got to focus on building their soil. And like I said, I have a planting method, and if at all possible, I like to use no-till, depending on what I'm planting, so that I'm not breaking up soil, holding more moisture, hopefully. And that's kind of one of the perks to, I guess, the no-till, is if you're planting, depending on when you're planting, maybe you're dealing with a drought or not a lot of rain. By not breaking up that soil, you're holding a little bit more moisture, which gives your seeds a little bit better chance of germination, a little bit better chances of survival and things like that. But on the other side of things, Doug likes to till. So if you are going to till, like I said, this comes back to not tilling too deep, just the top layer, because not only are you going to release dormant seeds and things like that, if you're really getting down, in the dirt, you're draining nutrients down deeper into the soil, but you're also getting rid of a lot of moisture. And that's another thing. Like I said, when we're planting these fall food plots, when is it? It's in the dead of the hot part of the summer a lot of times. So really focusing on the moisture side of things, and not tearing things up too bad, so that your plants can ultimately germinate and grow, at the most rapid pace possible, is another big step. So like I said, it depends where you are. If you're really dealing with poor soil, at the very least, if you're tilling, keep it, just don't go too deep. And if you want to do no-till, that works too. I've had plots where the pH the pH was great, and I was tilling. I was the guy back in the day. I'd till down God knows how far. And if you had good pH, you could get away with that for a couple of years. If you had good dirt, black dirt, you could get away with it. But for the guys that don't have that, you can't go out there and make those mistakes, because it's going to affect the way that your plots are ultimately growing. So I guess the next step for you guys is picking your planting method. How are you going to plant? Is it going to be the tilling? Is it going to be the no-till? They both work. Me and Doug, maybe we have different ideas on this, but guess what? At the end of the day, we both had success with them. You just got to find out what's going to work best for you.
Right.
Do you have the equipment? Those things. So you really got to come up with a plan as to what's going to work for you. And if you only got a 1/4 acre plot, does it pay for you to get a no-till drill and all these things like that?
Yeah.
If you're diehard, maybe, but maybe not, So that's another side of things.
And it's funny, you touch on two things. And I'll go back to real quickly on, for every inch you till down, you're bringing up 3 inches of moisture, first and foremost. And then second of all, equipment. You're right. You got to utilize what you have. Is it worth you buying a $7,000 drill to sit there and put in a 1/4 acre, a 1/2 acre? I don't think so. But
some people, maybe. There's some diehard people out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it works for you,
yes.
I don't care.
Absolutely.
But one thing that I tell people is, if you build it, they will come. Deer are very lazy. So if you got a food source and you start out with 5 and you say, well, there's no deer around, but you're one of the only person, in an area that's got a food source, you're going to attract more and more and more. You just give it time, and you're going to have a pile, and then your food plots are going to have to be huge, because you are holding a pile of deer. So these are all things that, customers got to think outside the box before you start food plotting. Like how and it's cool to watch deer. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great. And it's cool to have a bunch of deer. It gives you more choices. I get that. But for every action, there's going to be a reaction. So you're going to have to be prepared to deal with that problem too. And it's a good problem to have, but if you're out of groceries, because I get this all the time too. I put in a 1/2 acre food plot, and by the rut, it was gone, and my deer are all gone. So what's your point? What do the moral of the story is, maybe you need to build more. And I don't know what your situation is. I don't know if you can afford to get a dozer to come in. I don't know if you have other air. These are all things that I don't know. But I'm just telling you, for every action, there's a reaction, and you got to figure it out as you go.
Yeah. So like I said, I think we covered a good amount of steps today. We're going on probably 45, 50 minutes already. Yep. If we had to break down what we went over today, obviously get that soil test done. Once you get that soil test done, you can go in with the game plan as to what you would like to plant, but ultimately that soil test is gonna tell you what you can get away with planting this year. After that, if you got to build soil, focus on that. If you got that low pH, if your soil needs certain things, focus on that. Use that liquid lime to get instant satisfaction year number 1. Ultimately, maybe try and get a granular or a pelletized, lime in there to build soil long term. But
Right.
if you want results year number one, and you got poor soil, get that liquid lime in there. You're gonna get some instantaneous benefits by doing that. After that, the next in our final step, Doug, I got a fawn 5-10 yards from my window actually right now.
Well, he's coming to say hi. Oh, look at that. That is so romantic.
Here's another one. There's another one out there.
Oh, be doggone. Oh, Mom can't be too far.
They heard the food plot talk. They had to come in.
There you go. Hey, where's our fiddles?
So anyway, the last step that we wanted to kind of go over today, pick your planting method. At least, especially if you got a lower pH or a less, nutritious soil, I guess you could say, how you plant is going to make a big difference. Don't go too deep into the soil bed because you're going to be draining nutrients, releasing moisture that you're going to ultimately need to get good germination. So maybe it's tilling, maybe it's a no-till drill, maybe it's just throw and grow. You got to do the best with what you got. So, with that being said, that's kind of part one of what we had going for food plots for dummies today. Is there anything else that you want to add, Doug?
No, I'm just looking forward to having like Chris on, our guests on the next week. She'll talk about the soil test kits themselves, and then we'll have on the guys from Plot Doctor. I think that will also answer a lot of questions, or at least bring awareness to what we're trying to do. And we got some future guests coming up. I think some more other land managers coming on board will be helpful. I think also other nutritionists. I'd like to get some deer nutritionists on. We could talk a little bit more in depth about that too as we go forward. But I think this is going to be fun. I think we're at a good place right now to get started, and we're going to get some education out there to the public. I think that'll be a good. I'm excited to at least help these our customers out and people out in general that even aren't our customers, because I think this is all about learning and it's all about education, and that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Like I said, we said it a couple times during this podcast, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. We try to hit on all those different ways because all those different ways might work for different people. So with that being said, make sure to tune in next week. Obviously, we're going to get a little bit more in depth with the soil samples and how that whole process works. Other than that, stick with us weekly. We're going to keep coming back with more episodes. Make sure to subscribe to this so you're getting updates so that when we're posting these videos. And maybe you got a question that you had that we can answer in these podcasts. And if you do have questions, feel free to jump in the comments, anything like that. Maybe hit us up with some other topics maybe we didn't think of, or maybe we went a little too in depth with something, which we tried not to do. But maybe there's a step back that we gotta explain something to you. Even the liquid lime stuff, a lot of people don't even know that something like liquid lime exists. That's a product out there that you can use. So if we're going over your heads with certain stuff, let us know. Get in the comments. If you got certain topics, get in the comments. Let us know what you guys think. And other than that, I think that's a wrap on the day. Sound good to you, Doug?
I think it's wonderful. I think we touched base on a lot of good things, a lot of good info for customers, and that's all that matters right now.
Absolutely. So like I said, that's what we got for you guys today. Make sure to tune in next week. And that's a wrap. That's another episode of Plotting for Success. And this is part one of Food Plotting for Dummies. Have a good one, everybody.
Take care, everybody.